Hey everyone, how's your day going? Whether it's been good or rough, you're not alone. So sit back, relax, and let's step into the world of mystery together. It was that time of year again. The annual autumn carnival had returned to town. Strings of multicolored lights flickered across the fairgrounds, illuminating booths stacked with oversized stuffed animals, rows of food vendors serving hot dogs and funnel cakes, and rides that creaked with a mixture of nostalgia and age. Despite the carnival's dark history, odd mishaps, unexplained disappearances, it was welcome back year after year. No one really questioned it anymore. If a few people went missing, well, accidents happened. I was there with Brian and my only real friends. We weren't exactly the most social kids at school, but we had each other. As the sun dipped below the horizon, we weaved through the thick crowds, passing by fortune tellers and fun houses, the scent of deep-fried everything hanging in the cool autumn air. Ferris wheel first? And suggested, pointing to the towering structure on the edge of the carnival. Its neon lights flickered erratically. Brian hesitated. I don't trust those things. Loose supports, overworked operators. One bad bolt and we're flying off into the night. I smirked, not about to let Brian's paranoia ruin the fun. Come on, man. What's the worst that could happen? After some teasing, Brian finally gave in. We boarded one of the creaky metal cars, and as the wheel began to turn, I rocked it back and forth, grinning as Brian paled and gripped the bar. Stop doing that, he snapped, covering his face with his hands. I laughed, looking over the carnival from above. That's when I saw it, a carousel hidden away behind a thicket of trees, separate from the rest of the attractions. The lights were on, casting an eerie golden glow, but there were no lines, no workers. No one at all. We're going there next, I said, pointing, and followed my gaze. I don't remember that being here last year. Brian shook his head. There's a reason no one's on it. The Ferris wheel creaked to a stop and we climbed out. I led the way toward the forgotten ride, pushing past the thick, overgrown trees that seemed oddly out of place. Up close, the carousel looked old. The horses were weathered, their once bright paint chipped and peeling, revealing rusted metal beneath. The pole-mounted figures weren't just horses either. There were other creatures, a snarling wolf, a skeletal deer, a lion whose jaw hung open just a little too wide. The center column was decorated with faded portraits of laughing clowns, their painted eyes seeming to follow us as we stepped closer. This thing is seriously messed up, and muttered. Brian took a step back. We shouldn't be here. I rolled my eyes. Oh, come on. It's just a ride. Before they could argue, I hopped onto a Palomino horse. The moment I settled onto the saddle, the carousel roared to life. The lights flared, flooding the area with an unnatural glow. The music started, loud, warbling, distorted, as if it were being played on an ancient, broken calliope. The platform beneath me shuddered and began to spin. At first, it was exhilarating, but then it didn't stop. The speed increased, the music growing more feverish, the laughter of the painted clowns twisting into something shrill and unnatural. I tried to move. My limbs felt heavy, as if something invisible was pressing me down. My hands were stuck to the pole, my fingers locked in place. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. The dancing figures painted on the carousel's center were shifting. One turned its head toward me. I jerked my gaze away, heart pounding. But when I looked again, they were still. The ride spun faster. Brian and Ann were nothing but blurred figures now. The wind howled in my ears. I tried to scream, but my mouth wouldn't move. I was grinning, a wide, unnatural smile stretching my face. My lips wouldn't close. Something grabbed me. I felt hands, cold, bony fingers wrapping around my arms. The painted figures weren't just moving, they were reaching for me. The clowns, the dancers, the grotesque creatures from the murals, all of them were pulling me in. And Brian stood at the edge, watching in horror as something warm splattered against Anne's face. She touched it, looked down. Blood. Brian screamed as an arm was flung from the carousel, landing at his feet. Then, suddenly, the carousel slowed. The music wound down, the lights dimming. The ride came to a stop. There was no sign of me. Blood was everywhere, staining the rusted poles, dripping from the painted clowns' mouths. The air reeked of iron. The horses stood still, their hollow eyes reflecting the horror-struck faces of my friends. And there, frozen in place, was me. My wide grin, my contorted body, melded into the carousel itself. My skin had turned metallic, my arms fused with the decorations. I was part of the ride now, trapped in the frozen embrace of the grinning clowns. The carousel had claimed another soul. Brian and Ann ran for help. But by the time they returned with a worker, the blood was gone. The carousel stood still, looking just as abandoned and forgotten as it had before. And I I was never found. The carnival stayed another few nights before packing up and vanishing as it always did. The next year, it returned same as before. No one remembered the missing boy. No one spoke of the blood, the screams, the carousel hidden in the trees. But the carousel was still there, and it was waiting for its next rider. Maybe the real horror isn't just in the supernatural, but in how easily people forget the things that go wrong. Every year, the carnival comes back. Every year, people flock to it, lured by the flashing lights and the promise of fun. But some rides shouldn't be ridden. Some things are meant to be left alone. So, next time you visit a fairground and see a ride that looks wrong, too old, too empty, too separate from everything else, maybe, just maybe, you should walk away. Because some rides don't just take tickets. They take people. I never thought I'd return to Kentucky. After my mom passed away, I packed up my life and took my son, Tyler, on a road trip through the Appalachian Mountains, heading back to my childhood home. I hadn't been there in over a decade, but life had a way of pulling you back to places you swore you'd never see again. A lot of things about Kentucky still creeped me out. Abandoned houses swallowed by the forest, empty roads stretching for miles, the feeling that something was always watching. But nothing haunted me more than the legend of Sprinkles, the killer clown. It was a story I heard growing up, whispered among kids at recess, passed down from older brothers and sisters. Back in 1973, a caravan of circus performers was traveling through the mountains when a storm hit. The icy roads sent their vehicles crashing down into a ravine. Many died instantly, but 5 clowns survived. When rescuers finally found them days later, only 3 were still alive. And that was when the real horror began. The survivors told police a clown named Sprinkles, one who wasn't even part of their group, had kept them hostage. Starving and delirious, he forced them to eat the flesh of their dead companions. One of the captives managed to break free and alerted the authorities, but by the time they returned, Sprinkles was gone. Years later, trail cams in the deep woods of eastern Kentucky captured images of a clown, standing motionless in the trees, watching hikers from afar. The photos made the news, but Sprinkles was never caught. Some said he was long dead. Others believed he was still out there, waiting. That legend had terrified me as a kid. And now, as I drove through the winding roads of my hometown, lost in thought, I was jolted back to reality by the sound of a familiar, eerie tune. The ice cream truck. Tyler's eyes lit up. "Dad, ice cream." We pulled over near the curb, and the truck sat parked under the dim glow of a street lamp. The music warbled strangely, as if the speakers were old and broken. And then the driver stepped out, a clown. My stomach twisted. The man was tall, dressed in a faded striped uniform with oversized yellow shoes. His makeup was smeared, his red grin a little too wide. The moment his eyes landed on Tyler, his smile grew sharper. "Great choice, kid," he said as Tyler ordered a chocolate cone with Sprinkles. I reached for my wallet, but the clown waved me off. "No charge today, just delicious ice cream." The way he looked at my son made my skin crawl. The next day, around the same time, I heard that same warbled tune. The ice cream truck was parked outside again. I went out with Tyler, watching closely this time. The clown's uniform looked even more tattered than before, as if the colors were fading. But he still greeted my son with that same unsettling grin. "This time it's $3.50, he said. I frowned. "I thought it was free yesterday. That was just for new customers." The clown chuckled, handing Tyler the cone. Something about the way he lingered unsettled me. Every day after that, the truck returned. And every day, Tyler rushed outside to meet him. At first, I told myself it was harmless, that I was being paranoid. But then, I started noticing things. The truck never parked in the same spot twice. The clown's uniform seemed to change slightly every day, almost as if it were decaying. And Tyler, he was becoming obsessed. One night, I caught him staring out the window, waiting. "Tyler?" I asked. He didn't turn. He said he'll see me soon. I felt ice in my veins. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the living room, flipping through channels, when a breaking news report caught my attention. Authorities confirm they have arrested a suspect responsible for the recent string of child abductions in the area. Witnesses claim the perpetrator was seen luring children into his van, disguised as an ice cream vendor. My heart stopped. A photo of the suspect flashed on the screen, and it wasn't him. I shot up from the couch, panic rising in my chest. If the real kidnapper had been caught, then who had been visiting my son? I ran to the door, throwing it open just as the ice cream truck rolled up the street, its haunting tune filling the night. "Tyler, get away from him," I shouted, sprinting toward the truck. The clown dropped the ice cream and lunged backward, but I was faster. I tackled him, driving my car keys into his eye. He screamed. Blood poured down his face as he stumbled to the ground. His laughter warped, turning into a distorted, high-pitched giggle, like a broken toy winding down. Tyler was shaking, his small hands clenched into fists. We locked ourselves inside, my pulse hammering in my ears as the sirens approached. I turned up the volume on the news, expecting them to confirm that the real Sprinkles had finally been caught. But then, the news anchor spoke. The suspect is now in custody, and authorities confirmed there are no other suspects at large. No, that wasn't possible. I had just attacked someone who wasn't the real kidnapper. I turned to Tyler. His face was pale, but his fear wasn't directed outside anymore. It was directed at me. I had let the legend of Sprinkles get inside my head. I had become obsessed, so much so that I had just stabbed an innocent man. Hadn't I? I looked outside. The ice cream truck was gone. No blood, no sign of a struggle, just an overturned cone melting into the pavement. A faint, warbling lullaby played in the wind. I grabbed Tyler and held him close, because now I wasn't sure of anything anymore. And for the first time, I had to ask myself, who was the real monster here? Fear is a powerful thing. It makes us see threats where there are none. It warps reality until we're no longer sure what's real and what isn't. Maybe Sprinkles was just a story, or maybe he's still out there watching, waiting, and maybe I had just attacked the wrong clown. So next time you hear the soft jingle of an ice cream truck at night, take a second to really listen, because you never know who's behind the wheel. I've always been obsessed with words. Poetry, stories, even old myths. There was something about the way words could shape a world, twist reality, pull emotions from people like an invisible force. But some words were never meant to be spoken. And I learned that the hard way. It started on an ordinary afternoon at the library. I had just finished my shift at the local coffee shop and decided to browse the poetry section looking for inspiration. My dream was to become a poet, but lately my work had felt hollow. I needed something darker, something with bite. That's when I found it. A thin, leather-bound book tucked between two oversized volumes, dusty and forgotten. The title was embossed in faded gold, Sakin, Cursed Verses of the Past. I ran my fingers over the worn cover and flipped through its pages until my eyes landed on something strange. A poem written in delicate, almost frantic script. The title? Tomino's Hell. I had heard whispers about it before, stories online, superstitions in obscure forums. They said reading it out loud was a death sentence. That misfortune, sickness, or worse would befall anyone who dared to utter its words. I had always thought it was nonsense. Just another urban legend. But as I traced the first few lines with my fingertips, a chill crept down my spine. Elder sister vomits blood. Younger sister breathes fire. While sweet little Tomino just spits up the jewels. Something about the words felt wrong. The air around me grew heavy, the light above me flickered. I glanced around the library, suddenly aware that the once bustling room was now eerily silent. The old librarian at the front desk was watching me. When I made eye contact, she immediately looked away, her lips tightening. Then, as if making a decision, she hurried toward me. "You shouldn't be reading that," she said, her voice a whisper. I laughed awkwardly. "It's just a poem." Her expression hardened. "If you value your life, do not read it out loud." That book wasn't supposed to be on the shelf. That should have been my first warning. But instead, I slipped the book into my bag and checked it out. That night was open mic night at the coffee shop where I worked. I had planned on reading one of my own poems, but at the last minute I felt a pull toward the forbidden poem in my bag. It was dark, disturbing, raw, everything I had been searching for. And deep down, a part of me wanted to prove the legend wrong. As my name was called, I stepped onto the small stage, the dim cafe lights casting eerie shadows against the brick walls. I could feel the audience watching me, waiting. I cleared my throat, took a breath, and began to read. The moment the words left my lips, everything changed. The cafe grew colder. The chatter in the room died down, replaced by an unnatural silence. The air thickened, pressing against my chest, making it harder to breathe. And then, the lights went out. Gasps echoed through the room as people scrambled for their phones, their screens casting eerie glows across their panicked faces. I stood frozen on the stage, heart pounding. And then, out of the darkness, I heard it. A whisper. No, multiple whispers, overlapping, surrounding me. You called to us. And now we see you. A shiver ran through me. My pulse thundered in my ears. Suddenly, the lights flickered back on. But something was wrong. People were staring at me, horrified. A woman near the front clapped a hand over her mouth, eyes wide with shock. I looked down and gasped. The words of the poem had etched themselves onto my arms, dark ink burned into my skin like they had been carved from the inside out. The room spun. My vision blurred. And then I collapsed. I woke up in my bed, drenched in sweat. My head throbbed, my body felt like it had been set on fire. I yanked up my sleeves, expecting to see the words still carved into my skin. But they were gone. Had it all been a nightmare? That's when I heard it. A soft, wet cough from the corner of my room. My breath caught in my throat. Slowly, I turned my head, and there, crouched in the darkness, was a small figure. A boy. His body was thin and sickly, his skin pale as death. His wide, black eyes bored into mine, unblinking. Blood dribbled from his lips as he whispered, his voice raspy and broken. You read my poem. Now you must finish it. I ran. I bolted from my apartment, fleeing into the cold night air, not caring if my neighbors thought I was insane. But the whispers followed me. In the wind. In the flickering streetlights. In the distorted voices coming through my phone. Tomino was everywhere. And the worst part? The final verse of the poem was missing from the book. I had called something someone, and now I was unfinished business. I don't know how long I have left, but if you ever come across a poem called Tomino's Hell, do not read it. Because some words aren't meant to be spoken. Some names aren't meant to be called. And if you do, be prepared to finish what you started. Superstitions exist for a reason. Maybe they're just old stories meant to scare us, but maybe, just maybe, some warnings are meant to be taken seriously. Tomino's poem isn't just a myth. It's a summoning. And somewhere, even now, in the places between the waking world and nightmares, he is still waiting. So if you ever see that poem, turn the page. And for the love of God, do not read it aloud.